Добрий день, я вітаю.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Hanna, and I'm happy to see all of you in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's day 457 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and we understand that with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the security configuration has completely changed in the world. It has changed in Europe, it was globally violated, and now there is a question to everybody how to restore this security configuration. So today we will be talking about a very important topic. We will be talking about the prospects of Ukraine's accession to NATO in the eve of the summit that we all expect to be happening in June. We will talk to our speakers. Today I want to introduce to you Rasa, Juknevičienė, a member of the European Parliament, President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in September-November 2018. It's Hanna, Hopko, Chair of the ANTS board, Sergiy Solodkyy, First Deputy Director of the New Europe Center, and another speaker joining us online is the ANTS Network International Relations and Foreign Policy expert, Ms. Kateryna. I hope you see and hear us. So let's start our conversation. The first question will be to Ms. Rasa. To what extent the accession of Ukraine to NATO may restore, can give us the long-term guarantees of security, maybe for Ukraine and whole of NATO?
I was told.
У нас працює синхронний переклад. Ви можете...
I know,
Yes,
I understood what did you say in Ukrainian, no problem. Not yet to speak in Ukrainian, but to understand, and especially on NATO issues, it's not so difficult. Yeah, so thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity, and it's so nice to have Hanna next to me, my friend, I have to say, since long time ago, working together on NATO issues, be it in NATO PA or in your parliament and in my parliament as well. So yes, this is utmost important. First of all, I would like to inform you that I came here to Kyiv Security Forum, having behind me very important document, paper. And today I can speak not only on behalf of my own understanding, but also on behalf of my European People Party political group in European Parliament, which is the largest one, and European People Party as an umbrella party in European Union covers all like-minded parties like in Lithuania, like Christian Democrats in Germany, or other similar parties, powerful politicians and political parties over Europe. And having in mind that today in NATO there is no consensus yet on invitation for Ukraine to become member of NATO, not yet. Our paper, our document was important experience on the possibility to speak among us in the group from different countries and to find consensus. So, and we have this consensus today. If somebody wants to get this paper, it's not long enough to read. So we would be happy to provide you with that paper, at least Kateryna Musienko, she worked also together with us in the parliament a lot on that paper, and she will deliver that paper immediately. The main message is that Ukraine's membership in NATO, and I will quote by heart the most important message we put on that paper, that we think that the coming summits in Vilnius and Washington, D.C. next year will pave the way for Ukraine's invitation to NATO and the full membership of Ukraine in NATO will be provided as soon as the active military actions will be over. So why it's so important why it's so important was to agree on invitation, first of all, because this would be very powerful message, and especially to Russia. We put on that paper 3 most important points. First, we need Ukraine in NATO. It's not in the same wording as I said now, but it's translated, I translated into most familiar understanding. Why? Because we need sustainable peace and security in European continent. And without Ukrainian membership in NATO, we don't see the sustainable peace for the future. Because we need European continent and European Union, if you want, we need Ukraine in NATO. Not only it's important for Ukraine, and I am always trying to change the narrative, saying that we need Ukraine. As most country, they have now most powerful armed forces, and the country which is able to protect the rest of the Europe from this eastern threats. They are happening and happening and happening and happening since ages. Not 100 years ago started, not only today. So the first moment, we need Ukraine for sustainable peace in European continent. Of course, it's important for Ukraine, yes. And the third one is for Russia. Because without changes in Russia in the future, will be no sustainable peace in the continent. And having this in mind, the victory in the battlefield field in Ukraine, liberation of the territory, I understand liberation as it was agreed in 91, the borders of Ukraine, and without sending very clear message inviting Ukraine for NATO membership to Kremlin, forget it. Forget your imperialistic aspirations. Forget your imperialistic approach. It's over. It's the end of the imperialistic history of Russian Federation. And that's, and I will stop here, and this is the precondition to start some changes in Russia itself.
Дякую, пані Расо. Пані Ганно,
Thank you, Ms. Rasa. Ms. Hanna, recently we've heard the statements by General Secretary of NATO. He says that NATO will be in NATO, in the NATO family. It's unanimously supported by all the members, but as soon as the discussion of details begins, we know that there is some misconsensus inside. So are we able to reach that consensus, and what is it going to look like? Thank you very much. I think that the first important step was approval for training of Ukrainian pilots for F-16 and extension of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. We have success in acquisition, in obtaining of NATO material, HIMARS, Storm Shadow, long-range missiles, Leopard tanks. We're await for ATACMS, and soon we're about to get F-16 fighter jets. But again, NATO membership is a very important signal for geopolitical success and victory of Ukraine. That's why now we've come from different countries. We were in Copenhagen, where we were talking about F-16. We also visited Vilnius, where the NATO summit is about to take place. And if at least a third part of NATO takes the same stance as Lithuania, we would be able to talk not only about invitation, but the beginning of ratification of documents during this summit as an asymmetric response to the Russian aggression. Look, there's nothing impossible. Really, there are hesitating countries, there are swinging countries, they have different arguments, but it's the matter of a resilient work, meticulous work. We have to go to Washington, D.C., and not only to the capital, but to the important states, both Republican and Democratic. And we have to explain there why the role of the United States is definitive there. We have to go to Berlin and to explain it in the same way to the Germans, and we have to explain it in the France as well, because, for example, Great Britain, they support our membership, because the mistakes of the 2008 Bucharest summit, they have to be corrected, they have to be rectified. There's no time to suspend this decision. I hope Ukraine will be the next member to join NATO. We started this campaign already. We have partners in Vilnius, yellow-blue, who started this campaign. So Ukraine is about to become a 33rd member of NATO. From Vilnius to Washington, the time for historic decisions has come. And again, what's important, I agree, and I thank Ms. Rasa for her many years of experience as a head of Parliamentary Assembly of NATO and deputy of the Secretary of European Parliament. The integration of Ukraine into NATO and European Union and NATO, it's very important to reinforce the alliance and European Union as the political subject. And now we have a model Parliamentary Assembly of NATO. The ANTS network gathers the Euro-Atlantic youth, the 600 students from our higher educational institutions. They underwent the training. Now there are diplomats having their addresses, and we say that, look, it's not only the armed forces, but also the youth who know what is NATO, what is Parliamentary Assembly. So again, we are ready to reinforce NATO with the best practices of our armed forces and our youth as a human capital to reinforce it. So youth model of Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, the youth, they say again that we want to see Ukraine as the 33rd member of NATO. So our partners from New Europe Center who keep knocking on the doors for the candidacy status, they work with us, and we know what are the countries to focus on, just in case they hear the arguments. So before Vilnius, we see some historic decisions. Maybe I exaggerate my optimism, but we start this political campaign. There is understanding. We have to get understanding of what the public says in those countries. Mr. Sergiy, so what's your way with your organization? What do you do on your way to joining? Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much for this discussion. I want to thank all the friends who are present in this discussion. I want to thank Ms. Hanna Hopko for her activities both in Ukraine and abroad, for her Euro-Atlantic efforts. And I want to thank Ms. Rasa for the role that Lithuania plays for their support of continuous support of Ukraine. And it would be very symbolic, and it would be right if we really get some historic moment, specifically in Vilnius. That would be a very right symbol for Ukraine. That would be a right signal and symbol for Lithuania. And it would be a present, a gift to all of the democratic world, because there were so many mistakes, there were so many erroneous steps taken by everybody, not only in Budapest, not only in Bucharest, not only in Minsk, that there is some destiny thing about that in Vilnius all those mistakes of the past should be rectified. We should demonstrate that we've learned the lessons right. I would like to focus on a number of key lessons that the democratic world and NATO as a key institution guarding the world democracy, they should demonstrate that Russia has no right of veto. It's time to demonstrate it, because no matter what NATO says, it looked like Moscow had that right. So NATO has to demonstrate that they are capable of defending democratic values, not only with declarations but with actions. The extension of arms and weapons is important, financial support is important, but nothing can defend democracy just as well as invitation of Ukraine to the alliance as equal among equals. There is no doubt Ukrainians know that they deserve it. And it's important the alliance to recognize that the best guarantee of security on the continent and in the world will be inclusion of Ukraine in NATO. Should Ukraine be a part of NATO long ago, back then when we were invited, since 2002? So should Ukraine be a part of NATO? Russia would never dare to announce war or special operation or any other type of intervention against a member of the alliance. Russia has committed their aggression only with understanding that Ukraine is an easy victim for their aggression. This is why I want to express this opinion for the countries which hesitate, which are afraid to infuriate Russia, that membership of Ukraine in NATO is of benefit to Russia, because the Russians, after Ukraine joins NATO, they will lose any appetite. They will never think again about any war with a NATO member. So we're making a strategic service to the future generations of Russia, so they don't think about attacking Ukraine, because Ukraine is irrevocably defended. It's irrevocable part of European space. They can forget about bringing back Ukraine to their orbit of influence. So talking about the mistakes of the past generally, I want to remind you, you know, I had a meeting with my Swedish colleagues this morning, and they were surprised to find out that it was back in 2002 when Ukraine expressed its desire to join NATO. So again, I want the West to remember that this idea has not emerged just now. The first time Ukraine expressed its intention to integrate into NATO on the 23rd of May 2002, it was stated back in Kuchma Times by Yevhen Marchuk, the secretary of NSDC. Why NATO refused to give us the action plan for accession? They didn't want to make any present for authoritarian Kuchma. They were expecting for a democratic president. And when Musienko came into office as a democratic office, they had another justification. There was a support necessary among the Ukrainian public. Then there was another honest response. It can provoke Russia's aggression. Then Yanukovych came into office. He proclaimed the country as neutral and out of any bloc. Well, NATO got calm a little bit, that now there is such security established in Ukraine. But as soon as Ukraine proclaimed itself as neutral, it has become the mostly unprotected, and in February 2014 Russia started its aggression right when Ukraine was neutral. And this historic excursion is the best example that not to provoke Russia is erroneous policy, because should NATO have demonstrated their strategic decisiveness back then, the war would not happen in future. It would not have instigated Russia to commit those steps, those aggressive steps. Ukrainians have learned their lessons too. It's more than 90% of Ukrainians who support integration to NATO. So those old arguments don't work. Should we wait for a right moment? We've been waiting for the right moment for 20 years. Another moment, it's like some NATO members will have elections soon, and this decision may not be supported in other countries. It may influence the election of this or that leader. We will not name those countries. Everybody can find that information online. So again, we ordered the questioning of the public opinion in Italy, United States, Netherlands, France, and more countries, and we articulated our question very clearly. In June this year, there will be a NATO summit in Vilnius, and Ukraine expects to get the invitation to join NATO shortly. So what do you think? Should NATO propose? And the part of the respondents, they think that Ukraine should be invited. There is some hesitation when to provide a candidacy status, whether it can be given during the period of active warfare. But talking about invitations, the public generally supports invitation of Ukraine during Vilnius Summit. So the figures: 56% in France, 50% in Germany, 53% in Italy, 55% in Netherlands, and 70% in the United States. This is why I would like to urge the governments of those countries, and among those are those hesitating, those who impede the consensus. So stop being afraid of your citizens. Don't operate the arguments that you were operating in the past. Those arguments are obsolete, they're outdated, they don't work anymore. I don't see any real argument that would impede you to invite Ukraine to NATO. And someone may be afraid we invite Ukraine right now, and it results in the necessity to enter into war with Russia. So when Finland and Sweden were invited, it did not result in immediate membership. But again, if we suspend this process with invitation, when we will be able to join, there is no real obstacle to invite Ukraine as soon as possible. The rest of the formalities, like some might say, there are some criteria that Ukraine does not comply with. It can all be solved during the negotiations, during the accession process. Thank you, Mr. Sergiy. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Kateryna for the time being. Greetings to all my colleagues from Brussels. I'm happy to see Rasa in Kyiv. It's my pleasure to see all of the speakers here. The geography of this matter is very expansive. The scale of the decision is to invite Ukraine to NATO. They are way beyond the borders of Ukraine, Europe, and they are really of global level. The war in Ukraine, it has impact on all the global architecture of security, and we have to understand what Russia does in other platforms. They create the crisis of media terrorism when all the international institutions are not effective. The United Nations Security Council is blocked due to Russian membership there. Those platforms, they become inefficient. And what we see now is that these regional tendencies, they're being reinforced. We see the creation of small alliances, small forums who propose their solutions to the problems, how to ensure peace and stability. We see new leaders such as China, Brazil, South African countries who come up with their proposals of so-called peace plans. And what meaning does it have to NATO? If we ask whether NATO is able to ensure stability of the world order and to protect its own citizens, no, not without Ukraine, because NATO has a unique opportunity now to rectify that mistake that they've made back in 2014 and later live in Ukraine in the gray zone, in fact not providing the real prospect of membership in either NATO or European Union. It resulted in the situation when Russia could reinforce their influence in other platforms all across the world. And there's the new geopolitical influence of those alliances when Russia agrees with other countries. So it's important for NATO to demonstrate a strong political will, strong political decision, to demonstrate that NATO can adapt to those new challenges and to act in a more creative way. The old diplomatic ways that were used, they're not efficient anymore because the framework has changed, the security situation has changed, and the policy for creation of those alliances has changed. So without Ukrainian membership in NATO, we cannot see the efficiency of NATO itself as a big political player. And at this very moment, because any other negotiations, any other quick peace plans proposed by other actors, that will be only a handicap for Putin and to commit another attack which will threaten the European Union countries now. So talking about the lost opportunities, yes, they were numerous, but now there is a unique historic moment, unique historic chance to rectify those mistakes. Meanwhile, it is still possible. So the political decision in the Vilnius Summit, it will be the direct response to Russia on a global level in many political platforms all around the world, and that will be a response heard in Kremlin finally, and it will solve a lot of problems of European countries. So we're not saying that it's only support of Ukraine. First of all, it helps to protect people in European Union, but it also influences other areas like economy. Talking about the plan for recovery of Ukraine, we were talking multi-billion funds. The European businesses who are about to come to Ukraine and they need security guarantees, and talking about the efficiency of this plan, talking about raising investments, the most important is the investment in security. Creation of guarantees will stimulate businesses who come to Ukraine right now to work on their projects. So the best plan is the plan of Ukrainian membership in NATO that we hope will be announced in the summit, the Vilnius Summit. Thank you, Kateryna. So talking about our expectations from Vilnius Summit, on one hand we see the government actors, everybody expects for some clear steps, clear proposals. We all await for invitation, but we understand there may be different scenarios. Some might say, even the journalists say, there was a publication recently that there are negotiations about Israeli security scenarios. So what are scenarios to be discussed during this summit, and what scenarios will be best for us? The question is to everybody.
Join NATO and also having this Soviet Union occupation period. But still, I think it's really important that our eastern flank NATO countries, they share their real security guarantees experience entering to NATO. And of course, there are many now discussions, even rumors about counteroffensive and then peace deal negotiations, about Israel scenario for Ukraine. But I think Ukrainian armed forces, Ukrainian people deserve to be equally received in NATO, in the alliance, as a contributor of global security. Also, I think Israel, we cannot compare the situation, and even Israel, the size, the historical and different type of issues. What we learn after recent periods also. So Russia is, even this night, there was also another massive attack on Kyiv and other cities. We still haven't received enough anti-air defense systems to protect our civilians and critical energy infrastructure. Still, when we are thinking about the winter season which is coming, And Russia destroyed during this winter a lot of, depending on the energy or critical, like 40%, and it will not be restored until next season because it's not so easy. So I think NATO membership, the invitation in Vilnius Summit, it's a clear geopolitical signal to Russian Federation, which is identity is pure imperialistic. That look, we are with Ukraine not as long as it takes. We see Ukraine as a future member, and we are preparing all the steps. It's like this candidate status for the EU membership last year. Remember, there are also some people, some experts, and some even politicians proposing us hybrid version of candidate status, which is actually not a candidate status, but then we traveled to different capitals, and I'm thankful to Rasa, to other Lithuanian friends like Andrius Kubilius for traveling to Berlin, Paris, and convincing key partners in the EU that Ukraine had to receive candidate status. And I do believe that this year, Ukraine, we will open negotiations for candidate status for Ukraine, Moldova. And also, I think it's important to talk about Georgia, to keep it in mind. But now I would like to give the floor to Rasa, because Rasa is a former Minister of Defense, is more experience in Israel scenario or other which are at the table. Please.
Прошу.
A lot to say on our experience. First of all, never give up. You know, when we look backwards, it looks like it was easy for us. Yes, it was different Russia. We were invited in 2002 for membership action plan. 2 years after Putin came to power, got power and not yet was able to do what he is doing now. So we used opportunity, momentum, open window. 3 of us, of those who were in the same situation, I mean part of Soviet Union occupied, we shorter time, you for longer time, and this also I think was very important moment, because support for NATO membership in my country since the very beginning was high, but not as high as it seems it is today. So we also had to overcome some kind of resistance inside, because Russia was doing the same steps, trying to find people against NATO membership, powerful, we call now them like influencers, you know, at that time it was no such title. But yes, even some group of people, they wanted to organize a referendum. And everything, we went through very similar how to say, steps, except of course the war, which is now. And remember a little bit the past in your country. I think because of one generation more in Soviet Union here, this is the difference, because you had Western Ukraine with the same past as we, with strong support for European, Euro-Atlantic dimension. You had other parts of Ukraine, they were more or less, how to say, had resistance or different, or not yet understood. So I remember very well the debates in NATO PA, our visits to Kyiv, to other parts of Ukraine. And the main problem was always, and the Westerners in the other countries, when we were arguing for membership action plan or Ukraine in NATO in the future, the main argument was, look to the opinion polls in the country. It was less than 30% or even much more less, sometimes about 20% only in Ukraine support for membership. And it meant that, look, so it's not possible to have country in NATO without support of the people. It changed a lot in 2014 only. 2014. So we can blame the West, we can blame us that we did something wrong in the past. Yes, 2008 Bucharest summit was the biggest mistake, but 2 years later Yanukovych was elected. I don't know how, was it fair election or not, but yes, he was elected officially, and he came, his first trip to Brussels was to NATO headquarters and said, no, we don't want anymore to be members of NATO. So this history is our history and common history, and we will not be able to change it. Now we have to think about the next steps, lessons learned, and now I will be a little bit more realistic maybe than Hanna, speaking about Vilnius Summit. In our paper, we speak about both Vilnius Summit and Washington Summit next year. So if you will provide your people with very high expectations about Vilnius Summit, that invitation will come immediately in Vilnius Summit, it also would be not very good to have this disappointment, because what we have to do in Vilnius, to upgrade as much as possible the level of and to prepare the soil for the invitation for Washington summit, and to try to change the mindset in the West. This front line in the West exists as well. What we are doing there is a fight in the Western front line for the mindsets, for the understanding, and you are witnessing how it's changing every time. Remember the first days, 24th, after the 24th of February, and what was the mood on so-called lethal weapons and everything? What kind of understanding was on Leopards, on, I don't know, F-16s, and everything changed. Even for candidacy status. I remember very well our debates 2 weeks before 24th February, when Ukrainians approached us in the European Parliament. Zelensky wanted to come, and they approached us for a resolution mentioning candidacy status. In my group, everybody was scared, shocked. What? Candidacy status? For them it was like they even didn't have any understanding on that. In few weeks, 3rd of March, everything changed. And we adopted this resolution in the European Parliament mentioning candidacy status with huge majority in different groups voted. Unfortunately, it took a lot from your country, but that's its reality, that the mindset is changing not as in the same way. So what we have to do now, we have to keep going to organize, and what Lithuania is doing in other countries, group of countries of willingness, to work with other countries. But we have in NATO also, maybe I will not name the countries, you know very well. They can, we can speak a lot here in this audience. But in Budapest, for example, I don't think they have the same understanding, and they have also voted to block any decision in NATO. It's not like majority are taking decisions. You know the situation. So also we're waiting election in Turkey. We don't know what will happen in Sweden even. So it's a lot to say, a lot to do, but step by step. And most important today, of course, to win this war, and I understand those who say that most important today, weapons, weapons and weapons, and of course at least message for invitation. Of course it's very important politically, but don't think that it will be the end of history even if you will join NATO. Some people in my country decided when we joined NATO in 2004, history is over, they will come and defend us. We decreased our spendings, we ended with our conscripts. Huge mistakes were done. So expectations are okay, but we have to understand that with both memberships, NATO and EU, the history will not be over. New challenges will come, and of course today we have to do this, what we have to do. But yes, never give up, and it will come. It took 14 years for us to become members of NATO since restored our independence. It was not just ops, and we got it.
Я дуже дякую вам за ці важливі слова. Хочу встигнути, щоб на
I appreciate your words. I want to give the floor to our colleagues.
As this distinguished member of the European Parliament, Madam Juknevičienė, I want you to continue to talk about changes. I have no doubt about Lithuania. I want to ask you about your skeptical partners in the NATO countries within the EU. Namely, I think there's a dilemma in the view of Ukraine that Ukraine ought to be in NATO for the sake of global security, but at the same time we can't talk about that while the war rages on and the territorial integrity isn't restored. These two takes don't resonate well with each other. So do you think our successful counteroffensive will help us break through this dilemma? As if two previous counteroffensives weren't enough, but still. Thank you.
Of course. Look, everybody and me, as my colleagues in European Parliament, we witnessed huge changes in the mindsets. Because in the very beginning, it's not a secret. When Russia attacked the first days, very few believed that it's possible to stay, to resist. And even, I think, in your country, in many countries, people were preparing themselves for long resistance under the occupation of Russia. Because I know that the colleagues, they were very sympathetic, of course, for Ukraine, but it was difficult to understand that it's possible to resist, and it happened. It was first, number one, change in the mindset in the West. That is possible. And today, when I am arguing with my colleagues, they are have some hesitations on invitation for membership. I feel that they still have this fear, on Russia. They still have this fear. Okay, nuclear, big country, and what will happen? We will provoke Russia, the same. So my argument is, of course, emotional one, but the argument is, look, Ukrainians are not afraid. And you somewhere in some capitals, far away, not very much far away, but at least not on the front line, you are afraid. You are scared. You have this fear. So this is every moment we talk about. So next step was Bucha, of course. Next step was liberation of when they got this information and this brutal views. The second was change of mindset. Then step by step, and also those Kharkiv and Kherson were liberated. And now, of course, it will depend very much on the front. But even what's going on in Russia itself also helps a lot to understand. What I would like to undermine and send a very important message. We talked a little bit in the very beginning. What is important to change the mindset in the West? Today, nobody speak about the future of Russia. And I know that in Ukraine, very many say that Russia will never be different. Russia always will be imperialistic. Russia is a country which we don't want to speak about at all. In my country as well. But this is connected also with your membership in NATO. Because if it is an opinion that Russia will never be different, and some people think that at the end of this war, we will have somehow restore relations with Russia. So if it will be the same, if we in our mind is understanding that Russia always will be the same, so we will be back to to them with some kind of dialogue and so on and so on. It means that we have to negotiate, we have to have dialogue, it means that we have to put something on the table for that dialogue, and that would be the biggest mistake, to put on the table possible NATO membership of Ukraine as a part of negotiations with Russia. But I am afraid that in some some people have this idea, and I would like to send this message via you. That would be the biggest mistake. And it's related with your question, why? Because if in the West we would have not only strategy to help Ukraine to win this war, but also to have strategy for sustainable peace, having in mind that Russia can be different. It means then, yes, it means that strategy on Russia, not be afraid to crush Putin's regime. Macron mentioned that we want to help Ukraine to win, but not to crush Russia. Yes, I agree, not Russia. But Putin's regime is necessary. It's necessary. And if that mindset would be able to prevail in the West, that would change their understanding towards NATO membership of Ukraine. Without aggressive regime in Russia, nobody in the West would be afraid to for that step. It's very complicated explanation maybe I gave you, but that is, I think, precondition, very important what we are doing now in European Parliament, and it will be important conference 5th and 6th of June in European Parliament, in first ever in the history, opposition of Russian Federation, based of course now outside Russia, will have their gathering. And they will try to speak among each other about the future of Russia.
Дякую вам. У нас є ще питання, прошу.
Thank you very much. We have more questions on the floor.
Are you saying that, as a member of the European Parliament, that you want to see a coup, a revolution in Russia to get rid of Putin?
I don't know what will happen, but I know that this regime have to be crushed, not directly. That we will bomb, do some revolution, but because of the victory of Ukraine, liberation of Crimea, everything, so it will be, the regime will be much weaker. And sending message with the invitation for Ukraine to NATO, it will be added value to show that Putin is weak leader. He lost this war. He lost everything. He lost Ukraine forever. People here, their attitudes towards Russia. He lost. Look, he wanted us to be back to the borders, to NATO situation as it was in '97, and today he got 1,000 kilometers more border with Russia. So with that, with those losses, he will be inside Russia. We expect inside Russia he will be not the same Putin. And in China, in every other countries, people and leaders will see that it's not Russia, a powerful Russia, which is able to, they are able to have, you know, the same as it was before. This is the precondition. Of course, it's up to Russians themselves to decide. But today, nobody sees alternative. And Putin is very happy when many say that, look, Russia always will be the same. So what does it mean? It means that only Putin or like Putin people will be able to be in power in Russia. So then Western politicians, powerful politicians, will be back to business as it was before, because it's no other choice. It's too big country. It will be a lot of arguments. We don't know what will happen in few years in our societies, you know, of everything. So this is precondition, most important precondition for the change in Russia. But of course, we are not able, and we will not do something directly, to organize revolutions if people will live. But most important is not to give up with sanctions, containment of regime until it will be like it happened in Soviet Union. My last remark on that, sorry, I am speaking too long. I was born in Soviet Union, in occupied Lithuania by Soviet Union. And in 1985, I was medical doctor in one small Lithuanian city. It was time when Gorbachev became a leader of Soviet Union. I didn't expect that in 5 years I will vote for Lithuanian independence. And I will be here in front of you speaking about Ukraine's NATO membership. Nobody expected. I don't know, maybe you who are here almost my age, you expected independent Ukraine or Lithuania. No, me not. And everybody believed that Soviet Union is powerful, country. Who knows, maybe in 5 years we will have Russia with open borders, and we will speak in Moscow about the future of Russia. And you will be the best example for that, for them.
Дякую.
If I may, it's so important that Ukrainian civil society organizations, experts community, we already developed the Sustainable Peace Manifesto. It's so important document which really provides recommendations, like a roadmap, how to reach sustainable peace, not at the expense of justice. So it's after almost 8 years of the peaceful settlement efforts. Remember, it was Minsk I, Minsk II, Normandy format, when Ukraine were under pressure. Please don't ask weapon, only political diplomatic ways. This is the right approach to go. All this failed, and we ended up with genocide, because Russia is committing a genocide against Ukraine. And this week there was very important NATO Parliamentary Assembly decision here, and in our document there are two parts: responsibility for the war, punishment for crimes of aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, compensation for material and moral damage caused to Ukraine by the Russian Federation. And here's also reparations, because when we are talking, of course, not just Putin, and also others should be punished for their criminal responsibility. But when we are talking about Russian society, so they should economically bear this responsibility via reparations, which is really important. And also decolonization of Russian history, because we have to make Russia free from Ukraine dependence. From the time of Peter I, when they renamed Muscovy, still in the name of Kyiv Rus, in 1721, then Soviet Union with Holodomor genocide organized by Stalin, and now Russian Federation. So it's about Russian Sikh imperialism, imperialistic statehood. So without tribunal, confiscation of Russian assets, and I'm very thankful to Rasa as a member of European Parliament for the resolutions they adopted in the Parliament, recognizing Wagner Group as a terroristic organization, recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, also decision on tribunal, and also decision on confiscation of Russian assets. And now I do hope that France, Belgium, they will, all the frozen assets in transparent way, they will send to Ukraine, because why should we take loans every day when Russia is destroying our cities and others? But in this document, we are actually, with also it's include NATO and the EU membership, so it's really important that they understand also that it's not just about change, regime change, Putin. It's also about Russian society, because in Afghanistan, in Iran, women were protesting. I would like to see protests happening in different regions in Russia, massively opposing Russian aggression against Ukraine and publicly speaking. So this is really important.
Дякую дуже, Ганно. Дуже коротко у нас.
Thank you very much, Hanna. We almost ran out of time. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Roman Kukharuk, Information Agency Nation. I have question to Ms. Musienko and Mr. Solodkyy. You mentioned the right things today, that NATO members have to be ready to invite Ukraine in Vilnius, but whether Ukraine is ready to be invited, and are we in compliance with NATO standards? For example, the rule of law, its absence in Ukrainian prosecutors' offices and in the courts, the absence of a politician in the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, are diplomats within all of our history. It was only Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko who were politicians in that office. In Europe, they are all politicians. They don't have diplomats in those top-level offices, so that the dialogue could be equal in that level. The parliament does not control the appointments in the embassies abroad. Such process is not in place in any of the civilized countries in the civilized world where we aspire to, and I don't clearly understand the status of Yermak. He is acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, he's acting Minister or Prime Minister or Minister or something else. Can you please be as brief as possible? Well, it was a lot of questions. I'll try to adhere to the substance as much as possible. What you just mentioned, there was not criteria for Ukrainian membership in NATO. Moreover, when there was a research ordered in NATO on how to expand, eventually it was found out that any integration of a new country will be happening on a case-by-case basis, on an individual basis. The countries will have specific criteria to comply with. In my opinion, Ukraine was ready to the war by a number of criteria that are in place with NATO, because we were moving quite dynamically in terms of compliance with NATO standards, and it was war which provoked the fact that Ukraine became to the maximum extent compatible with the countries of NATO, because Ukrainian army switches quite quickly and is mastering quite quickly the weapons used by NATO countries. And for what I understand, talking about NATO criteria, the most concern is the democratic control of the armed forces. And here you understand, as the war still rages on, the secrecy is of key importance here, and we have no questions on part of NATO to us, but those questions will arise because NATO is about military power, but it's also about democratic values, it's about democratic society, it's about the rule of law that you mentioned. But again, waiting for that perfect moment, we may find ourselves in a situation when we cannot wait for this moment, and we cannot be the best in anti-corruption. We cannot be better than NATO members in countering corruption. Still, they have problems. We cannot be more saint than the Pope. It's about our European integration. It's about the fundamentals, and we have to segregate them here. In NATO, in my opinion, we are ready for NATO. It's more about the NATO countries. I think they are less ready than us. We just have to propose the right arguments. We have to understand why the questions on our European integration way, they may be complicated, and we have to comply with all those criteria. Well, as to your question regarding the diplomats in the offices of the ministers of foreign affairs, maybe you're talking, there are no such criteria, no such requirements, and there is a requirement about a civil person in the office of the Minister of Defense. There is such a requirement and it's complied with. Ms. Kateryna, maybe you have some words to add. Yes, we just don't have enough time to bring our legislation into full compliance, because those young people who are present in the NATO assembly training in Kyiv, they will be in the front lines and they will take up the arms and to fight, and we will lose more and more such people every day, every week, every month. So it's not a question whether we are ready. The question is that we have to do everything in parallel. We have to implement the Euro integration reforms, we have to implement NATO standards, and we expect our partners to help us with that. We don't want them to find justification why don't try to find some additional models, and just to channel the resources to have Ukraine win the war and have those standards implemented as soon as possible. The West has made 3 mistakes already. They underestimated Russia, they underestimated the possibility of the full-scale invasion, and they did not help Ukraine implement the NATO standards as quick as it was possible. They also underestimated Ukraine, because we demonstrated what our armed forces are capable of, and we keep demonstrating it on a daily basis. And the third thing, the third mistake is we cannot have some expectations. We cannot have some decisions suspended. We don't have to wait for F-16, for HIMARS, for candidacy status, and we have these expectations to summit in Vilnius, and those negotiations to be going on in summer, so we have to join in all fronts. Thank you very much for this comment. I want to thank everybody for this very fundamental, very powerful conversation. Ms. Rasa, thank you for the systemic support of our people, of our country. We do appreciate it a lot, and what we want to say is, yes, we will expect that there is good results of the Vilnius Summit, but just like Ms. Rasa said, I agree, we have to approach it with a cold mind.
Your country, you are doing now the main job, and we are doing not enough. So really we understand this, that today you are our defenders. And my last word answering the question about the readiness of Ukraine for NATO membership, I have to say that if it would be my decision, I would change narrative that we have to ask you to join NATO, because you have the most powerful armed forces and you are so important for us. And EU membership will help you to change your society, your political system, together with us. So, Slava Ukraini!
Дякую вам.
Slava, thank you, thank you. We thank our armed forces. It's only thanks to them that we can hold events like this. We want to thank everybody who was joining us during this briefing. Glory to Ukraine.